parable, and there was somebody that we have a relationship with that teaches in parables. Does anybody know who that is? Oh, here.
Jesus.
Jesus taught in parables. Okay, so I want to talk to you just for a second about what those are. Now, these are a couple of definitions I pulled up off of all things the internet. Okay, and this says a parable is a succinct story in prose or verse. Everybody know what prose is?
No.
As opposed to a poem, it's just written out like a novel. Okay. So prose or verse, it illustrates one or more instructive principles or lessons or some kind of something that we would hold as normative, the normal way of being. So it differs from a fable. In the fables use animals, plants, inanimate objects, and forces of nature as characters, while parables generally feature human characters. So having said that, in this moment, what is a parable of Jesus that involves a human being? Anybody know? Yes.
A form that takes an animal.
No, don't read that.
Oh.
I asked a question. Did Jesus tell a story about anybody that was a human being?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. And who, can you name one or know a classic name of one of them? Yes.
Moses.
Moses. No, he didn't talk about, well, he talked about Moses, but not a parable, not a story that proved a point. Yes.
Didn't we say that was a parable about the guy that like put down seeds in different areas?
That was a parable, yeah. The sower went out to sow, and he threw seeds, and then they went different places. Yes, sir?
Isn't one time where the father had two sons, and one was really good, and one just got his money that he wanted and took off, and when he came back, they took his best half and had a feast?
Good summary. Does anybody know what that's called?
The parable of the two sons. Right?
Close, yeah, but the prodigal, usually called the parable of the prodigal son.
Parable of the good son.
Yes.
The one where the guy loses his sheep and he has to go find it.
Yeah.
And then when the lady loses her coin.
She has to go find it, right? Yeah.
Is it Noah in the Ark, is that one?
No, that's Old Testament. Jesus in the New Testament, so.
That was mine.
Oh, okay, yeah. Noah and the Ark is a story of God's promise to never destroy the earth again, but most of people don't view it as a parable. They believe that most people believe that Noah lived and had children and all that stuff. So, and parables are about people that weren't necessarily alive. So, but a story that was told about that. So then we have this, which is just another one. These are fancy words, but an illustrated discourse or an illustrated story that uses common events and culture to tell us a meaning. So if the story is of these two boys, that their father has two boys, and one takes off and one stays, and one stayed and took care of the ranch, and the other one took off and lived with the pigs. Everybody understood all of what Jesus was talking about. Some of us don't understand it as well. For example, how many of you, most of you live on a ranch, some of you live on a ranch? Do you ever do any ranching with sowing seeds?
No.
How do you ever do that?
Oh, I know how we do it.
How do you do
Pick
it?
up your tractor and pull it across the field.
Pull it across the field. Well, these guys didn't have tractors, right? They'd reach in their pocket and throw the seed like that. Okay, so so that's how they visioned that. When you think about somebody planting seed, you think about a tractor going around. So you would have to tell a story like that. Well, Jesus told those stories differently. So these parables that we're going to talk about tonight are Lost and Found. It's in Luke 15. The focus is on God making an extra effort to welcome the lost. And the biggest question is does God really look for everyone who's lost? Does God really go out and try and bring everybody home? Now here's the answer. The answer is yes, okay? But we're going to look at it from a little bit different perspective. And I'm going to pass on a couple things and go to this painting. Anybody ever heard of Rembrandt?
Yes.
Okay, Rembrandt is an artist, and Rembrandt did this painting, and this is a painting of the prodigal son. Now this is a little hard to see, but here is the son who went. What happened to him is that he took off. This is a story that Jesus tells. It's not about anybody, it's just a story that Jesus tells. And this son went to his father and he said, I want my inheritance. I want what you are going to give me when you die, but I want it now. So, if he was to receive that inheritance while this man is still alive, how does this guy look at this guy? He's now what? In his mind, dead. In this guy's mind, this guy is dead. Because he's received what he was going to get when he died. So he takes off, blows it, right? And ends up eating what the pigs ate. And stayed with the pigs. And then he gets this brilliant idea, and he says, I think I'm going to go home, and I'll get down on my knees, and I'll say to my father, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Bring me back as one of your hired servants. So as far as he's concerned, he's alive, but not in the same relationship, right? So he comes down the road, and before he even gets to his house, his father runs out and embraces him. And he's on his knees, and he says, Father, and he's getting ready to do everything with his father and say, you know, I've been a miserable kid. And the father says, stop, let's have a party. Yes?
I heard that, like, his father's servants were coming after him to, like, kill him because it was basically a dishonor since he was coming back like that.
Well, that's close. But what happens is the older brother hears about this party that the father is going to throw for this guy who's blown everything, right? And when he hears that, when this older son hears it, look at the look on his face. He is unhappy. He is not happy at all with this guy. Here's what happens. I'll come back to you in a minute. Here's what happens. He comes to his father, and his father forgives him and throws a party because he says, my son who is lost is found. My son who is dead, because he had to be dead, they had to be dead to each other, is now alive. And in this picture, this hand, I don't know if you can tell, is smaller than this hand. It's a little hard to see, but can you see that, how the fingers are smaller? This is a strong hand that Rembrandt said was the grace of God coming down on this young man in the way that a father would. But this is a softer hand, and God is also loving like a mother to receive that child back. And so Rembrandt says, tries to show the disgust of this guy. Like you said, what will happen when they get together? Will the servants want to kill him? There is a parable where the servants want to kill one of the sons, but not this parable. What happens is he throws this party, he kills a hog or a calf or whatever it was that they needed to kill, and they had this big party, and then the son says, look, I've been working for you forever, and you have never even bothered to kill a lamb for me and my friends. Yes?
So the small hand was to represent
the motherly side of God. You know, your father treats you a certain way, your mother treats you a certain way, right? I mean, both loving, but fathers have a different way of expressing that than mothers. And so Rembrandt wanted him to see that God, who this represents in the story, and welcomes all of us home even when we blow it, right? And those hands welcome him in. But the son fusses at the father, basically disowns him, and the father says, I have always been there for you. I have always been there for you. Why can't you celebrate that your brother is back? And so we think that Jesus is basically trying to say, look, God will always welcome you home. And instead of us being upset about people who are brought back, then we can, and be like this, then we can be more like this and say, welcome. We're glad to have you, and we love you. Okay? So Jesus is dealing with people who separate these kind of people out, say they're no good. They're people like this, that look down on people like that. He wants to change the way they're thinking. So Pastor Casey, you can pick it up here.
Okay. Thank you, Pastor Rick.
Okay.
So we're going to transition into another parable, which is a story. And this one, yes, sir, Caston.
Is it the coat of many colors?
There is, I tell you, that was an Old Testament one. It was with, that one was Joseph.
Oh.
There is another one. You know, here in this one, you've got what you think to be the bad boy, and this to be the good boy. And the bad boy gets the party, and they barbecue the 4-H cow. You know, there's a great big party, and you've got this jealous brother. So you got to decide in that parable, okay, who am I? Who am I most like? Am I like the jealous brother? Am I like the bad boy who needs forgiveness? And both of them know the Father's love. Now, here's this really neat transition. Okay, what did the youngest bad boy work with? Pigs. Okay. Have you seen the commercial with the talking pig?
Yes.
Right. That commercial is about an insurance company called Geico. Insurance company reminds me of another insurance company that says, like a good neighbor.
State Farm is there.
Oh man, y'all are lost to advertising. I can tell that right now. Okay, so you got like a good neighbor. State Farm is there, and what they try to do, and what they always try to be, is a good neighbor. And the thing they want you to remember throughout the rest of your life, especially when you start buying insurance, they want you to remember, oh yeah, State Farm, they're a good neighbor, so I want to go out and buy that. Of course, the pig wants you to buy Geico. So, being a good neighbor can be a whole lot of trouble. And, on the other hand, the world is in a big mess sometimes because people aren't good neighbors to each other. Whether it's individuals, or families, or nations, or different cultures. A lot of people have a tough time being a good neighbor. So a question might be, what is a good neighbor? And I'm glad you've asked that question. Oh, you didn't ask that question. Ask this question. What is a good neighbor?
What is a good neighbor?
Excellent question. And that is exactly what someone is going to ask Jesus in the parable called the Good Samaritan. How many of you think you've heard the story or the parable, the Good Samaritan? Okay, it is one, like the prodigal son, it is one of the most famous parables or stories in the Bible. And our lesson focus, before we read it, our lesson focus, Jesus teaches us to love our neighbors without boundaries. What are boundaries? Okay, kind of. They make a border between. There was a poem. If you haven't read it yet, in high school you will read a poem in English class about good neighbors, good fences make good neighbors. There'll be a famous book. You will read it. I guarantee it's one of the poems everybody used to read in high school. Okay, what this is saying: tear down the fences, tear down the borders. Your neighbors, they may be different from you. They may be in different places in the world, but they're going to be your neighbors. And a question I want you to think about, this is your thought question, and repeat after me. I know my enemy.
I know my enemy.
And I know my neighbor.
And I know my neighbor.
So how can they be
So how can they be
the same person?
the same person?
Okay, I want you to keep that in your mind. That's one of your thoughts to take home this week. I know my enemy, I know my neighbor, so how can they be the same person? Because sometimes they are going to be exactly the same person. Now, few people you got to know about in the parable. There are some people. First one is a priest. Okay, priests do religious things. In those days, the priest was a person of a religious group. In God's case, what was in Jesus' time, what was the religion that came right before Christianity? Judaism. Okay, so priest, he was a religious person, a Jewish leader who performs sacred duties and acts as a mediator. Anybody know what a mediator is? Yes, Cassie.
Someone who goes in and makes peace with both.
With
That takes
both.
no side.
With both sides, yeah. You sit between two parties, you try to mediate, you try to get the two parties to come in agreement. So, priest was kind of like between God and humans, and he was trying to get God and humans connected to each other. They also follow the laws of God. Now, a Levite, that's a weird name. You don't hear that much, but it's kind of like a priest. They're similar to a priest, religious leader who worked in the temple. All priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests.